Every day, the world wakes up to news of privacy, demanding attention. We are in the midst of a digital revolution. The questions, the laws, the consequences keep coming. But our mission remains the same. We must adapt and change as our work is tested and retested on an almost daily basis. We believe in the power of sharing ideas, experience, and knowledge, which calls us together to learn from our diverse community, to explore the full spectrum of privacy. We gather to answer the call.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the IAPP Global Privacy Summit. My name is Vivian Arts, and I have the honor of serving as the 2022 chair of the IAPP Board of Directors.
And hello, I'm Patrice Ettinger. I am the Chief Privacy Officer at Pfizer, and I had the pleasure of serving as the IAPP Board Chair in 2021.
And hello, everyone. I'm Justin Weiss. I am the Global Head of Data Privacy at Naspers and Prosus. I was privileged to serve as chair in 2020.
It has been 3 long years since we last gathered for an IAPP Global Privacy Summit here in Washington. The pandemic has affected our lives in countless ways. We have lost too many family members, friends, and colleagues to this horrible coronavirus. Our work, our schools, our travel, our ability to gather has been changed forever.
And we cannot fail to mention the ongoing challenges that our world faces. Yes, the pandemic continues. At the same time, we bear witness to the human suffering that is occurring in the Ukraine. Trevor Hughes, our president and CEO of IAPP, will be sharing some important updates from this stage tomorrow about the IAPP's efforts to support those in crisis due to this heartbreaking conflict.
Through all of this, the IAPP has continued to pursue its mission to serve all of you, members of the privacy community. We're very grateful to be able to come together after 3 long years.
So let's get to work. We have a tremendous conference planned for all of you, and it is my pleasure to now introduce our first keynote speaker, Professor Amy Gajda. Professor Gajda teaches at Tulane Law School in New Orleans and is a journalist turned lawyer. She is recognized internationally for her expertise in privacy, media law, torts, and the law of higher education. Her scholarship explores the tensions between social regulation and First Amendment values, particularly the shifting boundaries of press freedoms and rising public anxieties about the erosion of privacy.
Professor Gajda's latest book, Seek and Hide, The Tangled History of the Right to Privacy, is being released today. There are limited copies available to you at our bookstore just after the session.
Please join us in welcoming Professor Gajda to the stage.
Hi, everyone. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. And I'm here because I wanted to introduce you, to reintroduce you really, to a man you surely already know. It's Louis Brandeis, this man. Louis Brandeis is famous in privacy circles for a lot of reasons. He co-wrote with Sam Warren The Right to Privacy, the Harvard Law Review article from 1890 that laid the groundwork for much of our privacy law today. He had offered a powerful, stinging, and nation-changing dissent in the Olmstead wiretapping case that today gives us privacy protections against police investigations and so much more. We know a lot about Brandeis and the way he influenced our privacy interests. But what isn't as well known is the way that certain privacy interests influenced him. And that's what I want to share with you today. 3 examples of the sorts of things that stirred privacy concerns in this father of sorts of American privacy. 3 stories that you may not have heard before. And I'll do this in pictures for 2 reasons. First, because visual images motivated Brandeis and his co-author Warren in a big way. Visuals show the technology in play at the time they wrote The Right to Privacy and beyond. And these images will help explain precisely why people were so worried about privacy back then. Second, because if you're like me, some of these images, some of the stories that go with the images might surprise you because of the power of the invasions. First, this. This is an image from a book titled Cape Cod Folks, published in 1881. It's a sketch of Grandpa Fisher, a character who is hopelessly weak, confused, and defenseless. Here, he's dyeing his scraggly gray hair black so that he might look like a man of 30, only to end up, in the author's assessment, neither old nor young, human nor inhuman. Trouble was that Grandpa Fisher was a real person. He really looked like this. This hair dyeing thing really happened. And the author who wrote Cape Cod Folks had lived in this very real small town on Cape Cod, had worked as a teacher there, and had taken fastidious notes about her interactions with residents there. Cape Cod Folks was a true expose of small town life, the day's reality television, so to speak. But there were no stars here. One woman died. The official cause of her death was consumption, but everybody knew what had really killed her: the unpleasant notoriety forced upon her by that book, as her doctor put it. Louis Brandeis, relatively brand new attorney, handled the case not on her behalf or her family's behalf, but on behalf of the publisher. What's important here, though, is that Brandeis argued, in effect, that this was indeed an invasion of Grandpa Fisher's privacy, along with all of the others. It's just that this sort of privacy invasion didn't yet exist in law, he argued. Therefore, instead, the Cape Cod Folks book was only a breach of the canons of propriety and good manners, not a legal violation. The civil law didn't yet address eavesdropping or looking into one's windows either, Brandeis noted, so it certainly didn't recognize this publication-related invasion of the plaintiff's domestic privacy. Later, probably not coincidentally, just after Brandeis's cousin went missing in New York City, with resulting sensational press coverage about what may have happened, Brandeis settled the Cape Cod Folks case. That meant that Grandpa Fisher and all the outed others got money for their emotional pain because of what even Brandeis, the attorney for the publisher, believed was a privacy invasion. Second, this. 9 years after Cape Cod Folks, this copy of New York Illustrated News came out. It was September of 1890, and that was 3 months before Brandeis would publish The Right to Privacy, complaining about precisely this sort of thing. The headline reads, "Caught by a camera fiend." The caption, "A society young lady of Red Bank, New Jersey, while sunning herself after her morning bath, is photographed in her gay and limited attire by a snapshot from a stranger's camera." And indeed, there, off to the right of the tantalizingly busty young woman with the blouse falling down just so, is a man, camera in hand, hiding in the bushes, photographing her. The newspaper would pay anyone who'd send in such images, so this was surely sketched from that man's real photo. This was precisely the sort of chilling technological advancement that helped spark the right to privacy. Brandeis and Warren were worried especially about two things that this newspaper symbolizes. First, these nasty so-called detective cameras that suddenly gave photographers the ability to surreptitiously photograph people, women, like this one. Such cameras were even marketed in ads that way. Second, that the scandalous media of the day, Pulitzer included, could and would publish such pictures. Very clearly, something needed to be done to stop what even the New York Times worried was the growing invasion of individuals' privacy. And so weeks later, Brandeis and his co-author Warren published The Right to Privacy, the law review article that argued that we all have the right to be let alone. Some say it's the most famous law review of all time, the basis for our right to privacy today. And it worries very much about the people like those in Cape Cod folks whose stories are told against their wishes. It condemns the technology of the day that helped facilitate such telling, the cameras and the newspapers that, to paraphrase the New York Illustrated News itself, allowed graphic illustrations. Third, this image. Many years later, Louis Brandeis had become a justice on the United States Supreme Court and had learned about a police practice he found deeply disturbing. Police were eavesdropping on people's phone conversations by tapping into phone lines without a warrant. By this time, Brandeis had come to trust media more, and so he encouraged the newspaper editors, who were his friends, to report on the tactic. He hoped that his fellow justices might be similarly outraged and would vote to hear a wiretapping case. The justices thereafter granted certiorari and agreed to hear the Olmsted case. And this is the original Olmsted phone that's here in the building. Anyway, in bad news for Brandeis and for all of society at the time, the justices decided that such police activity was proper, that the phone lines were outside the home, so a warrant wasn't necessary. But Brandeis disagreed and wrote what became a powerfully persuasive dissent that has now become the law in the United States. He wrote that in modern times, subtler and more far-reaching devices had been created to invade privacy, making it possible for others to reveal what was whispered in the closet. He was especially worried, he said, about newer technology, including the evil incident to invasion of privacy of the telephone that made it possible to listen in on even the most confidential of conversations. The Brandeis dissent in Olmsted is a second reason that Brandeis is hugely famous in privacy circles, of course. And the principles in his Olmsted dissent are now the foundation for privacy in police investigations today. In short, police need a warrant. But as he worked on his dissenting opinion in the Olmsted case about wiretaps, Brandeis had an even broader sense of what privacy-related things might come one day, things that may sound troublingly familiar. He foresaw cloud-based storage and hacking to some extent. He predicted that the day would come when people, without removing papers from secret drawers, would be able to reproduce them in court and thereafter reveal to a jury the most intimate occurrences of the home. And he'd been just as worried about radium and photography and the developing power of television to peer back into a house to learn its secrets. And maybe even advances in the psychic and related sciences that could allow others to explore a man's unexpressed beliefs, thoughts, and emotions. But his in-the-present law clerk urged him to scratch all that from his dissenting opinion as very obviously impossible. Now we know that Brandeis wasn't wrong at all when he saw in effect nanny cams and doorbell cameras and internet data tracking that can indeed reveal our very thoughts. So let's return again to this picture. This is how Brandeis wanted you to see him. We're lucky to have it. By 1910, this was the only photograph of Brandeis that Brandeis had kept, or so he told a reporter. He'd taken care to destroy all of the others, he said. And those are 3 stories, really 4 if you consider the Brandeis photo, about what helped in part to motivate Brandeis in his calls for privacy. He was a man who cared deeply about privacy. He was worried about the technology that could invade people's privacy. He was worried about the people who would too. So maybe it's best to leave you with what Brandeis wrote in The Right to Privacy and in the Olmsted Dissent, that these sorts of things were the privacies of life, that they were of far greater importance than unwarranted governmental quests for truthful information, that they were of far greater importance to the individual and the sense of self than the public's right to know certain truthful information. That, as you know, largely remains the law in the United States today with regard to this type of privacy, even in an internet age in which much is recorded and much is published. And even as we grapple with the day's privacy concerns, we have Louis Brandeis to thank in large part for that foundation. Thank you.
Thank you, Malcolm. That was great and some great takeaways from that talk there. My name's Stephen Reynolds. I'm a partner at Baker McKenzie and a member of the IAPP Board of Directors. Our next speaker and final speaker this evening was sworn in as the chair of the Federal Trade Commission on June 15th, 2021. Prior to becoming head of the FTC, she was an associate professor of law at Columbia Law School, and she also previously served as counsel to the U.S. House Judiciary Committee's Subcommittee on Antitrust, Commercial, and Administrative Law, legal advisor to FTC Commissioner Rohit Chopra, and legal director at the Open Markets Institute. Joining us for her first public address focused on privacy issues as FTC chair, please welcome to the stage Lina Khan.
Hello, everybody. It's great to see you all. Thanks so much to Trevor and IAPP for the invitation to speak with you all today. It's a tremendous honor to be here. So it's a striking moment to be discussing the state of data privacy and security today, with the landscape having shifted so significantly even over the last few years. The pandemic hastened the digitization of our economy and society, further embedding digital technologies deeper into our lives, with schools, workplaces, and all manner of life switching over to virtual formats effectively overnight. We also saw that this digital transition was not experienced equally by all Americans, since many still lack access to reliable internet and affordable personal technologies. The experience of the last couple of years has both illustrated the tremendous benefits of these tools, as well as the challenges and risks posed by this growing dependence. We've seen how security vulnerabilities can have sweeping effects, disrupting fuel supply for an entire segment of the country and halting meat processing operations nationwide. We've also seen how privacy breaches can be materially consequential, with violations exposing millions of children during the course of doing their schoolwork, or resulting in the purchase and sale of individuals' sensitive health data. Meanwhile, greater adoption of workplace surveillance technologies and facial recognition tools is expanding data collection in newly invasive and potentially discriminatory ways. Americans are aware of the stakes and the potential hazards. One survey showed that close to 2/3 of Americans believe that it is no longer possible to go through daily life without companies collecting data about them, while over 80% feel that they have meager control over the data collected on them and believe that the risks of data collection by commercial entities outweigh the benefits. Against this backdrop, the Federal Trade Commission is charged with ensuring that our legal tools and our approach to law enforcement keep pace with market developments and business practices. With its long-standing expertise in how companies collect and deploy Americans' data, along with its unique combination of enforcement, policy, and research tools, the FTC is especially well-suited to this task. In my remarks today, I will offer a few observations about the new political economy of how Americans' data is tracked, gathered, and used, identify a few ways that the Federal Trade Commission is refining its approach in light of these new market realities, and lastly, share some broader questions that I believe these realities raise for the current frameworks we use for policing the use and abuse of individuals' data. Concerns about Americans' privacy has long preceded the digital age. Louis Brandeis and Samuel Warren in 1890 famously sought to define anew the exact nature and extent of privacy protections guaranteed by law in the face of, quote, recent inventions in business methods, quote. At bottom, they explained, the law protects people from the unwanted prying eyes of private actors almost in the same way that it protects against physical injury. Similarly, lawmakers in 1970 passed the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the first federal law to govern how private businesses could use Americans' personal information. The law prescribed the types of information that credit reporting agencies could use and guaranteed a person's right to see what was in their file, a recognition of the unique harms that can result when firms have unchecked power to create dossiers on people that can be used to then grant or deny them opportunities. Though these basic principles governing what types of personal information businesses can and cannot collect and use extend back decades, the context in which we must now apply them today looks dramatically different. Digital technologies have enabled firms to collect data on individuals at a hyper-granular level, tracking not just what a person purchased, for example, but also their keystroke usage, how long their mouse hovered over any particular item, and the full set of items that they viewed but did not buy. As people rely on digital tools to carry out a greater portion of daily tasks, the scope of information collected also becomes increasingly vast, ranging from one's precise location and full web browsing history to one's health records and complete network of family and friends. The availability of powerful cloud storage services and automated decision-making systems, meanwhile, have allowed companies to combine data across domains and retain and analyze it in aggregated form at an unprecedented scale, yielding stunningly detailed and comprehensive user profiles that can be used to target individuals with striking precision. Some firms, like weather forecasting or mapping apps, for example, may primarily use this personal data to customize service for individual users. Others can also market or sell this data to third-party brokers and other businesses in ancillary or secondary markets that most users may not even know exist. Indeed, the general lack of legal limits on what types of information can be monetized has yielded a booming economy built around the buying and selling of this data. This has let firms provide services for $0 while monetizing personal information, a business model that seems to incentivize endless tracking and vacuuming up of users' data. Indeed, the value that data brokers, advertisers, and others extract from this data has led firms to create an elaborate web of tools to surveil users across apps, websites, and devices. As one scholar has noted, today's digital economy represents probably the most highly surveilled environment in the history of humanity. While these data practices can enable services in forms of personalization that could in some instances be benefiting users, they can also enable business practices that harm Americans in a host of ways. For example, we've seen that firms can target scams and deceptive ads to consumers who are most susceptible to being lured by them. They can direct ads in key sectors like health, credit, housing, and the workplace based on consumers' race, gender, or age, engaging in unlawful discrimination. Collecting and sharing data on people's physical movements and online activity, meanwhile, can endanger them, enabling stalkers to track them in real time. And failing to keep sensitive personal information secure can also expose users to hackers, identity thieves, and cyber threats. The incentive to maximally collect and retain user data can also concentrate valuable data in ways that create systemic risk, increasing the hazards and costs of hacks and cyber attacks. Some, moreover, have also questioned whether the opacity and complexity of digital ad markets could be enabling widespread fraud and masking a major bubble. Beyond these specific harms, the data practices of today's surveillance economy can create and exacerbate deep asymmetries of information, exacerbating, in turn, imbalances of power. As numerous scholars have noted, businesses' access to and control over vast troves of granular data on individuals can give these firms enormous power to predict, influence, and control human behavior. In other words, what's at stake with these business practices is not just one's subjective preference for privacy over the long term, but one's freedom, dignity, and equal participation in our economy and our society. Our talented FTC teams are focused on adapting the Commission's existing authority to address and rectify unlawful data practices. A few key aspects of this approach are particularly worth noting. First, we're seeking to harness our scarce resources to maximize impact, particularly by focusing on firms whose business practices cause widespread harm. This means tackling conduct by dominant firms as well as intermediaries that may facilitate unlawful conduct on a massive scale. For example, last year, the Commission took action against OpenX, an ad exchange that handles billions of advertising requests involving consumer data, and the company was alleged to have unlawfully collected information from services directed at children. We intend to hold accountable dominant middlemen for consumer harms that they facilitate through unlawful data practices. Second, we are taking an interdisciplinary approach, assessing data practices through both a consumer protection and competition lens. Given the intersecting ways in which wide-scale data collection and commercial surveillance practices can facilitate violations of both consumer protection and antitrust laws, we are keen to marshal our expertise in both areas to ensure that we are grasping the full implications of particular business conduct and strategies. Also key to our interdisciplinary approach is our growing reliance on technologists, alongside the skilled lawyers, economists, and investigators who lead our enforcement work. We have already increased the number of technologists on our staff, drawing from a diverse set of skill sets, including data scientists and engineers, user design experts, and AI researchers, and we plan to continue building up this team. Third, when we encounter law violations, we are focused on designing effective remedies that are directly informed by the business incentives that various markets favor and reward. This includes pursuing remedies that fully cure the underlying harm and, where necessary, deprive lawbreakers of the fruits of their misconduct. For example, the Commission recently took action against Weight Watchers subsidiary Kurbo, alleging that the company had illegally harvested children's sensitive personal information, including their names, eating habits, daily activities, birth date, and persistent identifiers. Our settlement required not only that the business pay a penalty for its lawbreaking, but also that it delete its ill-gotten gain and destroy any algorithms derived from that data. Where appropriate, our remedies will also seek to foreground executive accountability through prophylactic limits on executives' conduct. In our action against SpyPhone, for example, the FTC banned both the company and its CEO from the surveillance business, resolving allegations that they had been secretly harvesting and selling real-time access to data on a range of sensitive activity. Lastly, we are focused on ensuring that our remedies evolve to reflect the latest best practices in security and privacy. In our recent action against Cafe Press, for example, our settlement remedied an alleged breach by requiring the use of multi-factor authentication, reflecting the latest thinking in secure credentialing. Even without a federal privacy or security law, the FTC has for decades served as a de facto enforcer in this domain, using Section 5 of the FTC Act and other statutory authorities to crack down on unlawful practices. No doubt, we will continue using our current enforcement tools to take swift and bold action. The realities of how firms surveil, categorize, and monetize user data in the modern economy, however, invites us to consider how we might need to update our approach further yet. First, the Commission is considering initiating a rulemaking to address commercial surveillance and lax data security practices. Given that our economy will only continue to further digitize, market-wide rules could help provide clear notice and render enforcement more impactful and efficient. Second, I believe we need to reassess the frameworks we presently use to assess unlawful conduct. Specifically, I am concerned that the present market realities may render the notice and consent paradigm outdated and insufficient. Many have noted the ways that this framework seems to fall short, given both the overwhelming nature of privacy policies and the fact that they may very well be beside the point. When faced with technologies that are increasingly critical for navigating modern life, users often lack a real set of alternatives and cannot reasonably forego using these tools. Going forward, I believe we should approach data privacy and security protections by considering substantive limits rather than just procedural protections, which tend to create process requirements while sidestepping more fundamental questions about whether certain types of data collection and processing should be permitted in the first place. The central role the digital tools will only continue to play invites us to consider whether we want to live in a society where firms can condition access to critical technologies and opportunities on users having to surrender to commercial surveillance. Privacy legislation from Congress could also help usher in this type of new paradigm. Thank you again for inviting me to speak with you all today. This is an incredibly exciting and momentous time for these issues, with a lot at stake and a tremendous amount of work to be done. And I'm looking forward to working with you all as we chart forward the path ahead.